Hi, I'm Tom Eschett, and this is Power and Politics, the award-winning podcast about the issues that are impacting you the most with the people that are making those decisions, the officials, the advocates, and everyone in between along the way, holding them accountable along the way at the same time. Today we speak with Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan off the heels of her final budget proposal here in 2025 for the 2026 fiscal year. We talked to her about that and also a recent statement to the Common Council regarding inclusionary zoning ordinance and what that all means here moving forward, along with a little bit about her future as well. Thanks as always for listening. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts or watch us on YouTube at CBS 6 Albany. We're here today with Albany Mayor Kathy Sheehan. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is coming off, of course, your budget presentation and some other things going on in the final few months of your tenure as mayor. So really appreciate you taking the time to come on. Before we get into that stuff, I do want to have you address quickly here what happened just not too long ago here at our station. You had Lorenz Kraus admitting to from his view, killing his parents. Obviously, it's being litigated in court at this point, but something, of course, Albany police very involved with, and you could say maybe a bit of a breakthrough in that when you saw some crews there at the scene last week. Let's just begin there. The role of Albany police and this breakthrough in this case, how did you see it, and what has that been like for the police department to come and finally be able to take steps towards justice in this way?
Well, first I want to commend our police department. They worked with other law enforcement agencies, obviously, and determined that they needed to dig deeper here, literally, and determined that there was a high likelihood that these individuals had been buried in their own backyard. And so, taking that from the getting the warrants that were needed to be able to do what they did, and then discovering those bodies, we thought we were in for a longer haul. The chief had set expectations at his press conference just really hours before the interview, and kudos to Greg. He did a phenomenal job with that interview. But we thought we were in for the long haul, needing to do DNA, determining cause of death. And it was pretty shocking to hear that admission. I think in some ways, though, it allows us to move on, to know with certainty what happened. But certainly a shock to everyone.
Yeah, I do want to follow up quickly because we've heard so much about the department being understaffed in the last few years and struggling with that. But also, I think it's good for people to know that investigations like this continue, right? At the end of the day, like this stuff's still happening.
Well, certainly when you look at the data, 86% closure rate for homicides, it's unheard of across the country, where homicide closure rates are less than 50% in most jurisdictions. Crime is down, and that's all because of the fact that this is a department that has figured out how to use technology, how to work, and ensure that we're doing what the public expects us to do, which is to solve crimes, and by solving crimes and getting dangerous people off the street, we're able to prevent crime as well. And so we have a very dedicated department that is working smarter and as hard as they possibly can to help keep us safe.
We'll circle back to some of that when it relates to the budget here in just a moment, but I do want to get to the inclusionary zoning statement you made. I think it was about a week or two ago at this point, appealing to the council once again to make changes to this, get rid of this. If people don't know the backstory of it, it was 2023. This was legislation that came through to kind of expand inclusionary zoning, I should say, in the city. That veto was overridden by the council, and you have been very outspoken against it ever since. Why make that statement at this point about inclusionary zoning?
Well, look, we predicted that this was what was going to happen. I hoped that maybe I was wrong. Maybe the advocates were right, and this would result in more market rate housing being built in the city. But exactly the opposite has happened. Exactly what we said was going to happen is where we are now, and it has resulted in the fact that we basically have a building moratorium for market rate housing. And what people need to understand is that when I say market rate housing, I'm talking about workforce housing, housing for the middle class. The only thing being built in the city of Albany right now is subsidized housing for people who make between 20 and 80% of area median income. So for our teachers, our nurses, the people who work for the city and our sanitation department, we are not building housing that is affordable for them. And so the impact that we've seen is that our tax base is not growing, which raises property taxes for everyone. And we are also seeing that pilot payment, which we usually get payment in lieu of taxes up front when a new development is built, we don't have any in the pipeline. So we've seen a $400,000 reduction in the number of pilot payments that we'll be receiving. And all of that is resulting in us having to increase the tax levy.
We had Jeff Buell here from Redburn Development a little more than a year ago now, and this was right after the whole central warehouse developments happened, where he decided that it wasn't the right move at that time, and also right after the soccer stadium proposal, Liberty Park, was on the table for him, and obviously that's part of a different conversation right now. But that was brought up, and we heard about his hesitations towards it and the impact that had as one of the layers of moving on from the central warehouse from that standpoint. From your standpoint, what about inclusionary zoning is getting in the way for developers? Is it the fact that they can't there's not enough meat on the bone at the end of the day? You know, the incentive for them to do so? Why is it stopping developers from investing here?
Well, what it's really requiring developers to do is to build subsidized housing but not get a subsidy. So a certain percentage of the units of a market rate development have to be affordable to somebody at 60% of area median income. But unlike with tax credit housing, there is no delta there. There is no way of paying that developer for the gap. And so what happens is developers can't get a bank to loan them money because the cash flow doesn't support a loan to build that development. It's just math. It's just simple arithmetic. There needs to be a certain return on the investment in order for a bank to provide funding for these developments to move forward. And there has been talk by some of the advocates that the problem is the interest rates. Well, none of that then explains why we're seeing market rate development happening all around us. It's happening in Troy, it's happening in Schenectady, in Colony, in Bethlehem, in Guilderland. So these projects are moving forward everywhere except the City of Albany. And it's time for our Common Council to recognize that this legislation is the problem. And we need to go back to the 5% that we had in place of inclusionary zoning. We would still be the only municipality in the region with inclusionary zoning, but that was resulting in affordable units being built in these market rate projects, creating the opportunity for economic mobility and economic diversity. That's what the advocates were seeking, and that's exactly the opposite of what they're getting. Now we're getting no market rate, and we're continuing to concentrate very low income property in our formerly redline neighborhoods.
There is, look to the state level though too. There's been legislation proposed to try and curtail hedge funds and these big brokerage firms, whatever, from buying up housing, even upstate. I know this is a New York City issue, but also I've talked to lawmakers that say this is an upstate where they're buying a lot and they're jacking up the prices. Is that all, part of this? That where you're seeing some of that?
We're not seeing that. We are not seeing that in the City of Albany. What we are seeing is that there is absolutely no market right now to build housing for people who make area median income or above. Think somebody who's making $50,000 or more. We're not building housing for them. We recently had to repeal our residency requirement for employees because our own employees can't find housing in the City of Albany because it's not being built. When you build more market rate housing, you help to prevent rents from escalating. But right now, none of that is being built. So there's no incentive to current landlords to improve their properties because there's less and less competition. It's not working. People had the best of intentions. I understand that they had the best of intentions, but it's time to say, this isn't working. Let's go back to what was working. And then if we want to continue to work on affordability, let's look at other ideas and let's look at what is working in other places. But this is not.
You mentioned other places. I'm glad you said that. The Pioneer Institute in Boston looked at their inclusionary zoning and had this to say, which does support some of what you're saying here. They say inclusionary zoning addresses urgent short-term housing needs for some families, but jeopardizes broad-based affordability, making more of a necessity for higher market rate prices. But they also have suggestions in there for how to maybe curtail that or do something different, like you just mentioned, and saying apply more generous zoning bonuses, streamline permitting for developers to incentivize them. Are those things that you think could help and could implement?
So I've proposed that we repeal the amendments and go back to what was working, and then talk about additional opportunities and ideas. There are other places where a developer pays an upfront amount of money into a fund that is then used to make affordable home ownership opportunities available for families. There are a lot of really great ideas out there, but we have to also recognize that we are a small market, a small city surrounded by large suburbs. And so we have to take into account all of the market forces that impact how investors look at building housing in the city of Albany. We're not Boston, we're not Seattle, we're not New York City. We need to find a solution that's going to work for Albany.
When it comes down to the council, you're obviously appealing to them to do this. How much space do you think they have for it?
Well, I'm not sure how much space they have for it, but I hope that our residents are listening. I've appealed to our residents, I've explained what's happening, and I've encouraged them to call their council member because this is hurting all of us. And we have to ensure that our council members understand that while the housing advocates may have had the best of intentions and may still somehow think that this is the right path for us to be on, it's hurting the average working family in the city of Albany.
Let's move on to the budget, which you proposed yesterday, and a part of your presentation revolved around the Youth Support Hub Pilot Program. $500,000 for that. Why?
Because we have heard from our residents and heard from our stakeholders that we need to be doing more to address challenges that our juveniles are facing. We have an entire group of young people who were deeply impacted by COVID, by not being in school, lost a lot of connections, and we are seeing that cohort really continue to struggle. And so this is an opportunity to look at creating a pilot of youth support to address the challenges that a number of our young people are seeing. I also think that it is a response to raise the age and to the fact that we have a number of juveniles who are justice involved, who are not getting the support that they need, whether it's through probation or the existing programs that are in place to try to help them. So how do we augment that, and how do we ensure that we're creating something that works for residents of the city of Albany? And that's really what we're responding to.
Obviously, there's been some talk, a lot of talk about raise the age stemming from the summer, but you're speaking more so for the funding aspect, correct?
Certainly. There is a lot of funding that is being unused at the state level. And so this is an opportunity for us to custom build with our community, very intentionally, a pilot program and appeal to the state to give us some of that funding. Right now, that funding is available only to the county. We think that if we can create a pilot and make a strong case for funding that and determining whether or not we can really help to reduce what we're seeing with youth violence in our city, that's a win-win for the state, for the county, and for the city.
The council was kicking around similar, I guess you could say, initiatives, youth safety and support hours. Is this a response to that? Is this in confluence with that? Where does this fit when it came to that? Because that obviously also addressed with the times of quote unquote so-called curfew in that too.
Certainly, and this is really what grew out of that conversation. Okay. So I don't know, there may be council members who still want to proceed with exploring a curfew, but what the data tells us is that most youth crime is happening not late at night. Most youth crime is happening during the day. And so there may be a need to have some late night alternative available, but I think we've got to really understand, and it'll be up to the next mayor and the next administration to formulate what this pilot is going to look like, but to really be there during the hours where we see these challenges happening. Just last night, we had a crime involving juveniles. It happened at 8:30 p.m. That wouldn't be within a curfew. So we've got to really ensure that we're looking at the data and what it's telling us about when youth are engaging in this behavior and how do we get them engaged in something positive during those hours instead of what we're seeing with a small number of our juveniles in the city.
Just real quick on that 500,000, how that breaks down. Is that more people to work with youth? Is that a program, or is that infrastructure? I guess how does that break down?
I think what we're looking at is mainly people. for a pilot. I think we are we're looking at the places and spaces that we already have, and so we'd be collaborating with our partners on where we would be able to provide these services. But the West Hill Community Center will be completed at the end of this year. The Albany South Community Center at the former Hoffman is going to be open by the middle of next year. And so we think that we have some of the spaces that might be amenable to doing this work. It's creating the programming around it.
Yeah, and I've heard that so far this being specific about this is obviously intentional, right, at this point, instead of just giving it to a department.
Right.
Yeah.
We're being very intentional about it as a result of conversations with our chief city auditor and members of the Common Council.
Let's get to public safety here in terms of the officers and interesting developments here. We've talked a lot in the last couple of years about the social workers within the police department. That definition has changed a little in the last couple of years as well. So now in the budget, there is in there crisis caseworkers and special patrol officers. There's 10 budgeted, I think, in 20 or something for crisis caseworkers, 12 special patrol officers. Are those different people? Are those different tasks that they are doing? What I know budgeting is one, can be a little complicated for those that are watching, but are those, can you just differentiate for us what that means?
Sure. I mean, it's really an evolution of what we learned when we initially put in our budget that we were talking about social workers. Social worker is a very specific license. A social worker has to work for a licensed social worker. So what we determined was that what we were really talking about when you looked at the job descriptions and what we needed these people to do was more along the case management. So same outcomes, same goals, but the titles have shifted a bit.
And being able to hire for that.
Yes.
Does that help break some of those barriers, which we've talked about before? Because I know that has been a process too.
So we've already been able to hire some of those case worker positions. Okay. And so that program is up and running. And as we look at being able to hire special patrol officers, the vision for that is looking at some of our retired police officers, those who we can bring in who don't necessarily need to be a sworn officer carrying a gun, but who certainly have a depth and breadth of experience to be really impactful in the community.
You also have a director of wellness as a new position. What's that?
So again, this is a department that really is focused on officer wellness. We have officers that are under a tremendous amount of stress and pressure. We still do not have we're not fully staffed with officers. So they're working a tremendous amount of overtime, and we want to ensure that we are able to focus on officer wellness and make sure that we're doing all that we can to support the officers that we have. Part of that is around retention. How do we make sure that we're doing the things that our officers expect us to do in order to retain them and want them to stay on the job?
The only question, follow-up maybe to the crisis caseworkers, special patrol officers, is why not, instead of investing that in the police department, invest outside of the police department in that, in terms of an organization or a nonprofit that would facilitate and do similar kind of work? Why keep that within the department?
Well, we think that when you look at what our officers are doing day in and day out, and the support that an individual may need from within the department in responding to a crisis call, we think that for right now, the best place for that is within the police department. Oftentimes when you show up at a call, you don't know what you're going to be facing. And we have seen that, unfortunately, in a number of situations where it turns out that an individual may be having a mental health crisis, but they may also be armed. And so that's why we think that at this point in time, that linkage is important, and we'll see how that works as we learn and build trust within the department and among the staff for how this is going to continue into the future.
Yeah, it kind of goes underneath the philosophy of Brendan Cox. Obviously, he's the interim commissioner, but also chief, but also, obviously was a big part of Daniel's Law, the state level too, which we talked about. Finally here, in terms of just the government, I guess you could say at the city level, of growing that a bit. And I think that's an interesting concept. And I know that there's some other dynamics, but right now you hear a lot, especially at the federal level, about streamlining the government, even at the state, of trying to save money. Why new positions, different staff titles? Why propose that in this budget? And obviously also with that comes raises for officials too.
Well, certainly let's talk about the raises for elected officials. Yep. We are only allowed to give ourselves a raise in an election year. So it only happens every 4 years. So that's why you see these increases, because we're not doing 1%, 2%, 3% a year as we are with our workforce. So I think that is something that does need to be addressed, and we have to ensure that our elected officials are fairly compensated. With respect to the organizational changes, I reached out to the individual who is most likely to be our next mayor. I know we have a general election coming up, but who is most likely to be our next mayor, and I offered her the opportunity to present me with what she would want the mayor's office budget to be. And that's what she presented. We discussed it, and I have put that in the budget. It's going to require more conversation between her and the council, explaining specifically what she expects those positions to do and why she wants to add those positions. But I think it's important that the next mayor walk into office with the support that they say that they need in order to be successful on day one.
You know, I think about you. Obviously, your dynamic right now. It's the line. I think it's in Hamilton. You're planting seeds in the garden you won't see, right? At this point, you know, what's that feel like for you at this point?
Well, look, I'm going to be working right up until the end of my term. We have a lot that is going on, and I had meetings today about projects that, again, I won't be the decision maker, but it's important to keep things moving forward, to not have things fall, you know, off the table simply because I'm not going to be there. And so I love this city. I'm going to continue to be a resident of this city. I want the city to be successful, and I'm, you know, ready to continue doing that work until the end of my term on December 31st.
I'd be remiss not doing my job if I didn't ask. After that day, is it private sector? Is it still public service? Is there a way you would lean after that day?
I'm in an exploratory phase. I've spoken to fellow mayors who have been in the same position, ending their terms, and all of them have encouraged me to listen and to not have a foregone conclusion about what that might be, but I certainly want to continue to contribute into work.
Is there any, right now, obviously there's a huge narrative at the federal level going on. Does that at all impact this as to where you might want to do and what you might want to do next?
Well, I certainly think that we need to have voices of reason and people still speaking out for democracy, for our Constitution, speaking about how many of the things that are happening at the federal level are not helping us to be safer, are not helping working families, are not helping the very people that those who are touting these changes claim that they're doing. And so I want to continue to be a voice for that as well, and to advocate for working families, for the residents of the City of Albany, and for our community, because there is still a tremendous amount of need.
Mayor Kathy Sheehan, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks.
Thanks for listening. Hit the subscribe button right now so you can stay up to date on these news-making conversations about the issues impacting New Yorkers the most: power and politics.